This is how it happened. This is how the Batman died.
10 years ago, Batman Arkham Asylum took the world by storm, revolutionizing active combat, stealth-based exploration mechanics, unique boss encounters, and overall dismissing the notion that Spider-Man is the only superhero that can have a good game. The game was such a surprise to most because not only was the lead development studio, Rocksteady, so little known, but the last few attempts at a Batman game had failed miserably. However, once the game launched and the world was reminded how iconic Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill are as the Dark Knight and the Clown Prince of Crime respectively, Rocksteady and WB Games realized they had a winning formula on their hands. They followed it up with Arkham City, which was just as beloved, if not even more. After this, they took 4 years developing the third entry in the franchise, Batman Arkham Knight, which served as the grand finale to this whole shebang. How did this game hold up when compared against the other two? I think it's time to find out. Rocksteady had already established a solid gameplay formula that they could only seek to expand on. There's little more satisfying than racking up a 50-plus combo while switching gadgets and employing multiple different strategies while doing it. The combat, stealth, and puzzle-solving elements leave little to be desired in this game and are only enhanced with the team-based combat opportunities in which there are moments where Batman works with Nightwing or Robin or Catwoman, in which times you can switch between characters or even perform team takedowns, which make the combat so much more delicious. The biggest change in the gameplay mechanics come in the form of the thing that fans had asked for most since the first game, being the Batmobile. The Batmobile ended up being both a blessing and a curse, and is a clear example of too much of a good thing being a very, very bad thing. The Batmobile opens the game up to a plethora of interesting and different possibilities in the world of the game, or at least it had the potential to, and I'm 95% sure that was the intention behind it. But it ends up being reduced to a tool you use to get out of tough situations that Batman would otherwise have to use his big detective brain to maneuver out of. It comes in two modes, one of which being a combat mode that allows the Batmobile to move in more precise and strategic manners. However, in most cases, after you've spent however much time driving to whatever part of Gotham that this part of the game takes place in to activate the next part of the story, it engages another combat sequence in which you fight an army of unmanned combat drones. This doesn't start to get old until you do it for about the 100th time, as it becomes a necessity in moving the plot along, and even more so in trying to complete the game. The Batmobile also seems to be conveniently equipped with everything that could ever be needed, including an electric power winch to remotely charge compatible devices, non-lethal riot suppression rounds, deep earth tree root scanners, tire tread reader/locators, proximity-based electric dispatch charges which incapacitate nearby criminals to avoid Batman running them over, just to keep his moral code intact, which I respect. However, the Batmobile in itself quickly stops feeling like an added element that makes you feel more in control and starts feeling like that annoying younger brother that you have to take with you when you go to the mall. It really begins to shine when it comes to the boss encounters. There are 3 true boss fights in this game and a considerable few moments with mini-bosses. All of these encounters are solved with the Batmobile, which is truly insulting when it comes to Deathstroke, the character with an axe to grind against Batman for defeating him way back in the day. Batman Arkham Origins, to be specific. He's reduced to a tank fight and an instant takedown. Maybe that's a matter of personal preference, and I definitely wouldn't say that you're wrong if you like the Batmobile. I feel, though, that it is undeniable that in absence of a proper control scheme that makes the vehicle feel good to pilot, the Batmobile is reduced to a gaping hole in the potential that the game once had. I briefly mentioned that the game has you traveling great distances across Gotham in the Batmobile. This does indeed imply that the game did decide to carry over possibly the weakest element from Arkham City, the open world. This world feels robust and lively at a glance, but the longer you play and the more you do, the more barren it becomes, which I suppose is true of most open world games. However, there's nothing to disguise the lack of flavor. There are no procedurally generated crimes to disrupt, nobody to save, only the occasional gaggle of random criminals to run over. This is because at the beginning of the game, the entire city is evacuated, save for the lowest of the low, Gotham City Police, and the goddamn Batman. Now, I'll admit, one of the more interesting things to do in the endgame was glide around the city looking at all the unique iconography. You have the Wayne Building, the LexCorp Building, the Clock Tower, Ace Chemicals, and more things from DC Comics. But it's also missing things, vital things. that work toward making the city feel like a real place, a functioning city. There are no stores, schools, restaurants, churches, not even a city hall. Almost all things that Insomniac's Spider-Man had only 3 years later. And I know that seems unfair because the game is set in Manhattan and Gotham is a fictional city, but that should give Batman the full advantage. Spider-Man had to try very hard to accurately replicate New York City while also placing ample references to the greater Marvel Universe. Gotham being fictional gives Rocksteady a blank canvas to develop one of the most interesting, dynamic, and unique environments in any game this whole generation. But instead, the city feels lifeless, looks bland, and ends up being overall unmemorable, leaving me wishing that it had simply been a linear experience like its grandfather. Now we are going into the story. This had all the room in the world to be the most interesting aspect of the entire game. I mean, for crying out loud, one of the first lines in the whole game is, "This is how the Batman died," leading you under the impression that this will serve as some sort of grand last stand for the Caped Crusader, that this story will challenge him like never before and serve as a perfect bookend for the overarching narrative built over the last 3 games. Or 2, if you want to exclude Arkham Origins, which you shouldn't. It's a fine game. The events of the plot kick off with Scarecrow declaring his grand return by unleashing a new and improved batch of his fear toxin, more powerful than any he's used before. This leads to Batman deciding to go after him and locate the source of the toxin, neutralize the supply, and put a stop to the Scarecrow. Along the way, a new challenger joins the battle in the form of the mysterious masked man, the Arkham Knight. This character serves as the direct mirror reflection of Batman. He knows all of his tricks, is prepared for each of his contingencies, and seems to understand him in a way that none of his foes quite can. It's clear that he's working with the Scarecrow, but we don't know why. Well, that's because there is no reason why. Their goals don't line up whatsoever. They're simply working together to manufacture tension. The grand plan is to hold Gotham hostage by initiating a device called the Cloudburst, which will release the new fear toxin all throughout Gotham, only affecting criminals. Scarecrow plans to make demands regarding Gotham, but he gave everyone plenty of time to leave town. I could mention the Poison Ivy subplot, but it hardly matters in the long run. The more interesting story lies within the Arkham Knight, because for whatever reason, he has such an axe to grind against Batman. Whoever he is, he must feel truly offended over what happened between the two of them. The mystery as to who it is, I'll admit, is largely kept intact until after being exposed to the fear toxin, Batman starts to see hallucinations of his old ward, Jason Todd. Someone whose death he still feels tremendous guilt over. In that very moment, the big reveal is blown and loses all impact. After the proper reveal, Scarecrow coerces Batman into surrendering to save Jim Gordon and Robin, at which point he reveals his identity to the world, but is betrayed by Jason and defeated by Batman, who then initiates the Nightfall Protocol, in which he fakes his own death and the game ends. Or so it seems. The only way to get the true ending is to complete the entirety of the game, which includes all the Riddler puzzles, which I could not possibly be bothered to do.
Oh, don't act all surprised, Bats. You knew this was going to happen sooner or later. Me stuck deep inside you. Me stuck deep inside you. Me stuck deep inside you.
Now, my friends, I have saved the most egregious element for last. The Joker. Regardless of my personal feelings towards the character, I was excited to see what this game could bring into the new post-Joker era, after he was killed at the end of Arkham City. Many, though, were nervous that there was no story to tell without him. Rocksteady must have been just as nervous, because at the beginning of the second act, Batman starts to hallucinate the Joker constantly. This gets in the way of the progression of the game at times, because in some moments, like, you might be taking an elevator, and you have to spawn in the hallucination of the Joker so that the game will continue. Because he has to say something so that, you can move on. He also starts to take a toll on the game's overall narrative in some of the worst ways possible, as he entirely steals the spotlight from the actual villains of the game. Scarecrow, who's still alive, and the Arkham Knight, after whom the game is titled. Perhaps the most intrusive element of Joker's entire involvement comes in the form of the 5 Joker subplot, wherein it's revealed that Joker infected 5 people with his Titan-riddled blood between the events of Batman Arkham Asylum and City. Now, Batman, having been infected with this blood, was a major plot point, forcing him to find a cure and administer it to himself. Hang on to that, I'm coming back to it, I swear. Now, towards the end of the game's second act, the plot completely derails because the Jokers are loose. It's mostly harmful, it's just a massive waste of time, even going so far as to imply that one of the victims has shown no symptoms only to try and pull a twist, revealing that he's the Jokerist of them all. It's also worth noting that while there's supposed to be 5 infected, only 4 cells are inhabited, later revealing that Batman is the 5th one. This portion of the game traps you in a loop of not knowing how to prevent Batman from going into the last cell for however long it takes for you to figure it out. Now, Batman being the last infected doesn't make sense because he cured himself in the last game, right? I guess it just stopped him from dying. And I'm not sure why, but this game acts like psychosis is a physical disease rather than a mental one, which is not only a weak plot device but a disservice to those that suffer from it. Jokerism isn't a condition, it is exclusive to him. Moving on from that, though, the Joker persona continues to creep and take over Batman's own psyche as the game goes on, even forcing him into situations that he would rather avoid and, triggering major hallucinations. This truly manifests towards the end when Scarecrow injects him with the fear toxin, triggering his own worst fear, that he would one day become the Joker. This is fair enough, but then the game gives you control of the Joker as you terrorize Gotham City. You then learn that the Joker's greatest fear is being forgotten about after he's gone, at which point Batman overpowers his will, locks Joker away, and becomes immune to the fear toxin, defeating both his inner and outer demons at once. This was supposed to be poetic, I'm sure of it. All in all, though, with everything considered, Batman Arkham Knight isn't the worst Batman game I've ever played. There's still plenty to enjoy, the gameplay is still fun and feels good to play, but it's hard to deny that the game suffers from a near crippling case of identity crisis, pulling it in so many directions and preventing it from ever fully committing to any one element, and thereby keeping it from blossoming into the Game of the Year contender it easily could have been. No disrespect to anyone who enjoys the game and disagrees with me. I just hope that you can look at the game with a more critical eye in the future. Here's to Rocksteady and what they can do in the future. Also, how sick are some of those suits you can wear?